Whatculture.
The sinking of the Titanic is a story that has grown so big in the cultural psyche that it's now hard to imagine that something so horrifically striking actually happened. But it did. Late on the 14th of April 1912, the ship hit an iceberg, going down in just over 2 hours, taking 1,500 people with her. However, so much of the Titanic mythology isn't exactly true. Up until the wreck was found in 1985, the entire story was based on the accounts of people whose primary focus was, surviving. The accepted story is that the ship speeds along, lookouts don't see the iceberg, ship turns too late, and the iceberg cuts a nice big hole in the side of the ship. Except, not a single one of those statements is actually true. So, with that in mind, I'm Adam from Whatculture.com, and these are 10 things you didn't know about the sinking of the Titanic. Number 10. It wasn't really about speed. For starters, while speed was a very big deal on board, she moved faster than most other ships out on the ocean, and there were rumblings of an attempt to break the record for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic, how fast Titanic was going wasn't a deciding factor in her fate. While the ship was moving fast upon collision, it was nothing extreme, and the ship never even got near to its full speed. It's simple physics to suggest that had the ship been moving slower, then there would have been more time to turn, which is technically true, but to say that it was excessive or someone was at fault for this implies there was an element of negligence or of putting the passengers in danger, and there wasn't. Number 9. It wasn't the lookout's fault. The night of April 14th was an unusually calm one on the Atlantic, but perversely, that's actually a bad thing. It meant the sea was so flat there were no waves to crest on any nearby icebergs, meaning that lookouts would only see them when they were much closer than normal. The main problem, though, was a lack of binoculars, which, though usually standard on board, were locked in a security box that nobody on board had a key for. Better late than never, though, someone kindly left a pair on Frederick Fleet's grave on the 100th anniversary of the sinking. Yes, the iceberg right ahead guy. Number 8. The sinking was caused by short-sighted engineering. In terms of things that were inevitably going to come back to haunt you, the Titanic being described as unsinkable is right up there with that time Jules said I definitely wouldn't hit him in the dick. Titanic was broken up by 15 watertight bulkheads that could be sealed remotely from the deckhouse. This meant that it could take on water in the first 4 compartments and still be fine. However, the fact it was so bad at turning meant that its attempts to swerve the iceberg simply exposed the entire side of the ship to the collision, and it breached the first 6. Had they just ploughed straight through it, however, it would have most likely stayed afloat. I mean, it would have looked a dreadful mess and everyone would have spilled their cognac, but far fewer compartments would have been breached. Number 7. The iceberg didn't rip a hole in the ship. Speaking of the damage, while there was definitely a big gaping hole in the Titanic, it wasn't caused by the iceberg snapping, piercing, ripping, or otherwise destroying the ship's hull. Like, we've all played Pokemon, ice moves are not very effective against steel. What actually happened was that the strength of the iceberg, coupled with the forward momentum of the ship, put enough pressure on the plates to cause the rivets holding the hull together to pop out, creating the hole that caused the water to rush in and, well, you know the rest. Number 6. Bruce Ismay wasn't the villain. Probably. One single fact that all Titanic movies can agree on is that Bruce Ismay, White Star Line chairman, was the closest thing the debacle has to a villain, as, according to passenger testimony, he was the one constantly pushing for more speed and later even jumped into a lifeboat, the absolute waste man. With information scarce and with the women and children confusing, the press and subsequently the public were happy to accept this. A Nazi propaganda film on the incident focused on him, and James Cameron kept him in his movie because, in his words, that's what the audience expects. But all Ismay was a victim of was a smear campaign, a result of he and newspaper mogul William Randolph Hearst having fallen out years previously. Multiple alternative tellings of the night have him helping people get off the ship, only stepping into one of the last lifeboats himself because there was copious space. Number 5. People wouldn't believe it split in 2. As water flooded the bow of the Titanic, it began to go under from the head down, which eventually created enough pressure for the whole thing to snap in 2. Now, we've all seen the film, so we know this, but a whole 7 decades after the sinking, this version of events was treated as a madcap theory. In fact, the consensus was that it slipped under quite peacefully. Only when the wreck was actually found, and the stern was over 1/3 of a mile away from the bow, did theories change, and eventually a pretty accurate version of events were worked out. Even now though, over 100 years after it happened, it's all still very much open to scientific debate. Number 4. The third-class passengers weren't locked below. Much of it may be accurate, but one moment of complete and utter fabrication in James Cameron's movie is the steerage passengers getting locked down in third class. Yes, it adds tension, installs a couple of action beats, and hammers home the class divide the ship is known to personify, but there isn't a single piece of factual evidence to back it up. The myth caught on because the proportion of third-class passengers who survived compared to first is so low, but that was because to reach the boats on the deck, third-class passengers had to navigate a winding collection of hallways and stairwells, in some cases signposted in a language many of them didn't even speak. I mean, to me that's pretty much as bad as locking them down there yourself, but what do I know? Number 3. The lifeboats were up to industry limits. Out of 2,224 passengers and crew, only 700 survived. A lot is made of lifeboats leaving half empty, but even if they'd all been full, the best case scenario would have been just 1,000 people surviving. That's because the chances of a ship going down so fast with no help nearby was treated as all but impossible, and in fact at first people refused to get into the boats as they were all just happy to wait to be rescued. Thomas Andrews, the ship's architect, had allowed space for more lifeboats, just in case, but the company overruled his choice and kept the boats to the minimum specified by the guidelines of the time. Number 2. It shouldn't have been women and children only in the lifeboats. Women and children first has been a maritime law for decades, and when it became clear Titanic's time was numbered, Captain Smith ordered women and children in and lower away. Unfortunately, this was taken by Second Officer Lytler to be women and children only. This led to some major confusion as the night went on, with boats launching half full despite men clamouring to get on board. Lytler was widely regarded as a key hero of the Titanic disaster, and to be fair, he was. The guy commanded an upturned lifeboat after the ship went under, but he did regrettably cause a costly confusion. Number 1. It wasn't a big deal until it sank. Titanic is a legend, one of the most famous ships that has ever existed and a symbol of the massive societal shifts of the early 20th century. I mean, it managed to completely change the meaning of the word Titanic. But if it hadn't hit that iceberg, there's no chance it would be remembered by anyone other than a few weird ship enthusiasts. You see, while technically Titanic was the biggest ship ever built up to that point, its launch and maiden voyage wasn't that much of an event. It was Olympic, its sister ship, which had been unveiled a year earlier, that had received all the press coverage, and Titanic was just seen as, well, more of the same. Even then, the Olympic was hauled for scrap in the 1930s, an ignominious end that the Titanic, had she not immortalised herself at the bottom of the ocean, could so easily have shared. Hello there, everybody. Trek Culture's Adam Cleary here, just to hold my hands up really quickly and say, I've tried my best to replicate, duplicate, just outright clone our god editor Chris Thompson here, and I have failed. It's been absolutely disastrous. An affront to God, somebody called one of the efforts, so do you know what? I give up. We're just going to have to hire a new video editor here at Trek Culture. And if you've been sitting at home watching this glorious channel thinking, I could do that, well, then prove it. Sunshine, there is an email address on screen right now. If you're interested in becoming part of the team, we want to see your show reels, we want to see your CVs, we want to hear what you can bring to this channel, and if you're good enough and we like you, maybe we'll get in touch and you too could be editing out the numerous mistakes I make in every single video. So yes, email address on screen now, CVs, show reels, etc. Join us here on Trek Culture to boldly, I don't know, fix it in the edit. Goodbye.